Okay, here is the exclusive buyer agency contract. Please, like I say in all of the trainings when it comes to the PAR forms, please print them out, read every single word that is on these contracts. The exclusive buyer agency contract is broken into sections. So it makes it easy to explain it if you just go section by section. Typically, what I say is, here is the document that's going to officially hire me as your buyer's agent. So we're going to go through this document. It's broken into sections. I'm going to explain each section as we go through. When we get to the end, I'm going to give you a chance to read through all of the pages. Any questions you have, I'll be happy to answer. And then we'll need to initial the bottom of each page and sign the last page and then move forward. The first section basically is going to just list the company that my real estate license hangs at, which is Keller Williams Collegeville, their license number, address, and phone number. And it's also going to list my name, my real estate license number, my phone number, and my email. The next section is your information. It's going to list your full name the way it appears on your driver's license, because any real estate contracts that we end up executing throughout our agency relationship together, your legal name will need to be present on them all, and it really should match your driver's license. Your mailing address and your email. Line 15, does the buyer have a written agreement, such as a buyer agency contract with another broker? So based on the conversations that we have had together, the answer to that is no. Now, for the purposes of when would you ever check yes? There were one or two times in my 10-year real estate career where I've checked yes. And the situation was I am not licensed in any other state currently other than Pennsylvania. However, I had referred somebody to an agent in New Jersey because they were looking in both places. They weren't sure if they wanted to live in PA or in Jersey. And so they ended up having a buyer agency agreement with two agents at the same time. Okay, the next section basically is the starting and end dates of this agreement. So typically right now, research is showing that it takes buyers 8 to 10 weeks in order to find a property that they love, write the offer, get it submitted and accepted, and then work through all of the details through contract to close to get you to the settlement table. And given that inventory is a little light right now, I do like to have my buyer agency contracts go for a minimum of 6 months, a maximum of 12. And then you, as the agent, need to have the conversation with your client about what they're going to be comfortable with. Now, are there going to be people that say to you that they only want it valid for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever? Yes. Talk through that conversation with them. And you're going to say, you're going to ask questions. Well, I just want to make sure I understand when you say that you want to do it for 30 days, what is the hesitation on doing it longer to give us more time to find the property and get through the process? See what it is they're concerned about. Once you guys have agreed on, the end date, the way you fill this out is you don't need to put anything in the start date because it by definition of a contract, it's going to start when it's signed. And it literally says this contract starts when signed. So there's no reason to put a date here. The contract ends 11:59 p.m. on X date, whatever you're putting in here. The next section is broker's fee. So here's how I explain this to buyer clients. My fee in order to help you is 3% plus a broker service fee of $495 to get you through the process into the settlement table on buying a home. Now, 99.9% of the time, the homes we are going to go and look at have a listing agent, and that listing agent would have already had a conversation with the seller to negotiate not only their commission to help them sell the property, but they would have already negotiated my commission as well for whatever agent brings the buyer. If we run into a property where the listing agent only negotiated commissions for themselves, or maybe the commission is less than the 3% that I typically charge, we're going to know that in advance so that you and I can then have a conversation about how we want to handle that. And there's a couple of different ways we can do that. If you have the funds and you want to just factor that into your closing costs, covering the fee that is owed to me, that's an option. If we want to potentially offer a higher price point for the property in question and then ask for a seller's assist, which means we're going to pay a few $1,000s more for the property, but we're going to ask the seller to give that money back in, at the closing table, we might be able to use that for my commission. So I don't want you to get too hung up on where my commission funds are going to come from. There's a bunch of different creative ways to solve that should we run into a situation where the listing agent is not already negotiated it with the seller. When you are going to fill this document out, you are going to put 3% in this field right here on line 32. You are then going to put the $495 on this line on this space right here on line 33. You are probably never, very rarely, going to put anything in this after the or on line 33. You also need to put 3% on line 34 right here, and you need to put your 495 on line 35. This sentence basically states that should we find a property that is a for sale by owner, my job will be to get a hold of the seller and to negotiate my commission with the seller directly on your behalf. Should we be successful and the seller is willing to pay my commission, then great, that's how we'll move forward and you're off the hook. If I'm not successful at getting the seller to cover my commission, then you and I are going to be back to having a conversation about some creative ways for us to solve that outside of just you funding it. 2B2, which is line 36, you will never put a number in this field here. We are never paid at the signing of this contract ever. There is no instance where that will ever have a number in there or that you will ever be handed money of any kind at the signing of this document. The way that I explain section 3 is if I just finished explaining the consumer notice, I will refer back to the consumer notice. I'll say, listen, this is the same thing that we just talked about with the consumer notice. It also is reiterated here. Then you're going to move to section 4, designated agency. Again, this was part of the consumer notice where we talked about how there are 300 agents in my office. However, I will be your designated agent. You guys will never check the box on line 71, ever. Designated agency is all that we practice here in Pennsylvania. You will never put a check mark in this box. You're then going to move to section 5, and you're going to explain that there may be times where you are going to need to provide services to the other side, okay? So 5A talks about how you as the buyer's agent cannot take any action that goes against what is in the buyer's best interest. This is where you being a fiduciary comes into play. You have to explain that the broker may provide a service to the seller for which the broker might accept a fee. That might be where maybe it's a dual agency situation where one of the agents in Keller Williams Collegeville has the listing. So Keller Williams Collegeville is the broker, and then you have the buyer. The broker is a dual agent, even though the listing agent and you are not, right? So that's what it's talking about here. It's also talking about how we have a title company and we have in-house lenders and we have the ability to order insurance. So there might be services that our office, the broker, provides that we would be providing to the other side, as well as to our client. It also talks about how the person that you're meeting with to go over this buyer agency agreement is not your only client. So there may be situations where you as an agent are showing the same property to multiple clients, and you might end up having multiple people interested in the same property. It also covers that it would be a conflict of interest if you were acting as a buyer's agent to help a person find and purchase a property, but you also were interested in purchasing that property yourself. That would create a conflict of interest. And so typically, the way that I explain this entire section is I'll say, Section 5 talks about the services that my office and or myself might be providing to other people. So here's an example. Number 1, my office has in-house lenders. We have an in-house title company, in-house insurance. It may be that we provide you and or the seller throughout the transaction access to those other services. By no means is it going to negatively impact my relationship as your buyer's agent with you, because my job as your fiduciary is to always act with regard to whatever is in your best interest. Keep in mind that, as much as you and I are going to have a great time working together, you are not my only client. And there may be times where I will be showing the same property to you that I'm showing to other clients that are looking in the same geographic areas and have the same budget and things that they're interested in. It would be a conflict of interest if I was also looking to purchase a property and was showing you properties that I wanted to also make an offer on. That is not going to be what happens here. So there's no worry that that's going to be an issue. Then we're going to move on to Section 6. Here's how you explain Section 6. This is the entire contract in order for you to officially hire me as your buyer's agent. There's no other documents that I need to present, and any changes will be in writing. Section 7 talks about the transfer of this contract. So the office my license is at has been around for the last 20 some odd years. If tomorrow it turns into a Coldwell Banker, then this contract will automatically transfer between a contract with you, me, and Keller Williams to you, me, and Coldwell Banker. Section 8 refers to confidentiality. Now, as a fiduciary to you, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, my job is to make sure that we are sharing with the listing agent and or the seller only information that is pertinent to moving the transaction along. Information about why you're looking to buy or personal information about your situation that has no bearing on the transaction itself is going to be kept confidential. Section 9 talks about expertise of a real estate agent. So I stay in my own lane. I am not a home inspector. I am not a mortgage lender. I am not an appraiser. As we are going through the process, looking at properties, working through an inspection, dealing with an appraisal, looking at the different things that are going to happen throughout the transaction, the minute we get to a question that you have or a concern that you have or a situation that is outside my area of an expertise as a real estate agent, I am going to refer you to the proper party to resolve that particular question or issue. And I have partners in the office and outside of the office across, lawyers, home inspectors, appraisers, whatever it is we need to make sure that you get the information that you need to make a database decision. Section 10 talks about deposit money. So as much as I would love to say that your earnest money deposit gets deposited into my bank account and I get to go shoe shopping, that is not what happens. All of the deposit money that you would potentially put forth when we go to submit an offer will be given to the listing agent. Their broker will put it into a non-interest bearing escrow account. And then when settlement comes on settlement day, they will then bring that earnest money deposit with them to the settlement table. So the way the math works is if your entire down payment is $40,000 and we give a $10,000 earnest money deposit with the initial offer when it's executed, instead of you bringing all 40 to the closing table, you will be bringing 30 because the 10 that you gave as the earnest deposit money will be brought to the settlement table by the listing agent. Section 11 basically says we do not discriminate for any reason ever. Section 12 talks about how you, Mr. or Mrs. Buyer, has the right to understand where there may be convicted sex offenders in relation to the subject properties that we are going to be going and looking at and you are potentially going to be buying. So I would encourage you, when we get to the point in the process where you found a house you absolutely love and want to move forward with submitting an offer, I'm going to encourage you to go to the Megan's Law website, type in that address, and just get a comfort level with who the registered sex offenders are that are in that area. Keep in mind that the Megan's Law website is going to give you not only where people live, but also where they work. So you want to make sure you're paying attention to that. Section 13 is going to talk about buyer inspections. So in the agreement of sale, when we get to a point where you find a home that you love, you are going to have the right to elect various different home inspections. Now, I want to make sure that you understand that, the properties that we are going to be seeing for showings, the seller is going to be required to keep them in the same condition they were when we saw them and made the offer. Should we get to a point where you want to make an offer and we are in a competitive situation and we need to have a conversation about potentially waiving inspections or doing an inspection deductible, or I have some other creative solutions that we can do at that time, We can have those conversations, but it'll be on a case by case basis because every house is different. It's going to depend on the age of the home, the condition of the home. Did the seller do a pre-listing inspection? Kind of, is it new construction? So every home is different, but you are going to have the right to do an inspection. And I want to make sure that you understand that that exists. Section 14 talks about recordings on the property. So pretty much in today's day and age, everybody has a Ring doorbell. Everybody has some sort of a Google or device in their home or they have security cameras in the front of the house, inside the house. By law, we are not supposed to be recorded without our express consent up front. However, when we get to a point where we are going and seeing properties, I am going to remind you prior to us walking up to the front door that any positive comments, feel free to make them. We can ask questions, talk about things while we're inside the home. If we happen to go inside a home where there is a situation where there is something you don't like, maybe there's an offensive odor, maybe it's a hoarder situation, maybe there are things about it that are problematic for you, we're going to want to keep that commentary to a minimum, and wait until we're outside and away from all of the potential recording devices to then have that conversation. So while I said the sellers are not supposed to be listening in while showings are happening, I know that it does happen, and we just don't want to say anything that could potentially offend the seller or the listing agent before we've had a chance to kind of work through and negotiate a strong offer to potentially get you the property. Section 15 talks about the real estate recovery fund. So every year when all of the real estate agents go to renew their license with the state of Pennsylvania, we all pay into something called the Pennsylvania Real Estate Recovery Fund. Should you find yourself in litigation with a realtor, so say you felt that somebody misrepresented themselves or somehow harmed you in some way, and you win the court case, and the amount of money that is owed to you is not an amount that the agent that you sued personally has in their bank accounts to cover, they will then tap into the real estate recovery fund to then make you whole. Section 16 talks about special clauses. So in the 10 years that I've been doing this, there has not been one time where I have had to select any sort of special clauses. So we're going to be leaving that section blank. Agents, coaching agents. B, right here where it says additional terms. If you run into a situation where the person that you are meeting with to get the buyer agency contract signed is really anxious or is giving you some pushback on the length of the contract or how do they get out of the contract, what I typically will do is I will say to them, if they're really, really concerned about being able to get out of the contract, I will say to them, listen, I understand your concern. Maybe you had a bad experience with another agent, or maybe you just are concerned about something throughout the process. Here's what I can do for you, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. I can add language into section B here that basically states that buyer and buyer's agent agree that as long as we are not under contract on a property, that should I fail to meet or exceed your expectations, that the buyer has the ability to cancel this buyer agency agreement at any time with a call, text, or an email, period. And then I reiterate, if we are already under contract, so I have written an offer, we have submitted it, and the seller has accepted it and it's been fully executed, unfortunately, you and I are stuck at the hip from there until the settlement table, no matter how unhappy you are. But if we are not under contract and you feel that I am not meeting or exceeding your expectations, we can part ways with a simple email, text, or phone call letting me know that. You're then going to say, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to read through both pages. Please let me know if you have any questions. And when you're ready to move forward, we're both going to sign and initial where indicated. That is basically the entire buyer agency contract. Now, another tip for you. Grab a PDF of the buyer agency contract, pop it into Google Gemini, and give it a prompt that says, I am a newer agent. help me understand the all of the main talking points that are the main talking points for each section of the buyer agency contract so that I can explain it to future buyer clients and then see what it gives you. It should give you a lot of the same things that I just rattled off.